Ethan and Mara thought their desert road trip would be an adventure of a lifetime. But when their car broke down in the middle of endless dunes, they discovered the desert was alive, and it was waiting for them. Shadows moved where no one should be. Footprints appeared from nowhere, and every step felt like the sand itself was guiding them toward something unspeakable. As night fell, the desert whispered, and they realized too late that some places never let you go. The desert stretched endlessly before me, a vast ocean of gold and red, the sun blazing like a furious eye overhead. Every mile I drove seemed to dissolve into another, the horizon melting into shimmering heat waves that distorted the rocks and sand. My throat felt like sandpaper, my skin scorched and raw, and every breath I drew tasted of dust and dryness. The GPS had gone blank hours ago, and my phone signal had vanished without a trace. At first, I thought it was an inconvenience, a small price to pay for the beauty of isolation. But as the sun leaned lower in the sky, painting the dunes in streaks of fire, a creeping unease began to settle over me, twisting my excitement into fear. In the distance, a shape caught my eye. A crumbling gas station, half swallowed by sand and shadows. Its windows were dark, the roof sagging under years of neglect. My rational mind told me it might be a place to rest, maybe refill my water bottle, but my instincts screamed caution. I slowed, the gravel crunching under my tires, and I noticed something that made my heart stop. Footprints. They were large, deep, and oddly spaced, leading from the horizon straight toward the station. They weren't mine. They couldn't be. I hadn't seen anyone else for miles. The closer I got, the heavier the air felt, thick and oppressive, like the desert itself was holding its breath. My stomach twisted into knots, and a shiver ran down my spine despite the heat. I scanned the area, expecting to see someone, or something, but there was only sand, rocks, and the collapsing structure before me. A sudden flicker in the corner of my eye made me jerk my head. Shadows shifted unnaturally along the walls of the gas station, though the sun was still high, too bright for real shadows to behave like that. I took a cautious step forward, my boots sinking slightly into the warm sand, and froze. There was a stillness here that wasn't natural. The wind that had whispered across the dunes moments ago seemed to vanish entirely, leaving only a tense silence that pressed against my ears. I noticed then that the footprints didn't have a clear beginning. They hadn't started from the road or any nearby path. They simply existed, stretching from nowhere, leading directly to me. My pulse quickened, my breath shallow and uneven. I wanted to turn back, run as fast as I could, but a strange curiosity held me rooted in place. I walked toward the station's entrance, every nerve screaming in protest. Dust hung in the air, catching the sunlight like tiny golden flecks, and the door creaked ominously as I pushed it open. I half expected emptiness, perhaps a few broken shelves, but the moment I stepped inside, a cold gust of air hit me, unnatural in the heat. And then I saw it. A shadow, darker than the dust around it, slipping along the back wall as if it were alive, observing me. My chest tightened, and I realized I had no idea if I was still safe in the sun, or if the desert had already claimed me. The inside of the station was worse than I had imagined. Dust coated every surface like a thick, suffocating blanket, and the shelves, mostly empty, leaned precariously as if ready to collapse at the slightest touch. The air was heavy, stale, carrying a faint metallic tang that made my stomach churn. At first I thought I might be alone, that this was just a forgotten building swallowed by the desert over decades. But then I heard it, a low, almost imperceptible humming, vibrating through the floor beneath my feet. I froze, straining to understand if it was the wind outside or some old, failing generator, but the sound persisted, steady and rhythmic, almost like a chant carried through the dust. My pulse raced as I followed the sound toward the back room. Each step made the floorboards groan beneath my weight, echoing far louder than they should. The humming grew louder with every footfall, reverberating through my chest until it felt like my ribs were trembling in time with it. I pressed my ear against the warped wood, trying to locate the source. That's when I heard it, a scraping, dragging sound, deep and deliberate, as if claws or some long-forgotten object were being pulled across stone beneath the floor. My skin crawled, a shiver racing from the back of my neck down to my toes. I forced myself to look around. The shadows cast by the afternoon sun stretched unnaturally along the walls, bending and warping as though the building itself were alive. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to run back into the desert where I could at least see danger approaching. But something compelled me to stay, a mixture of fear and curiosity that made my legs feel heavy, reluctant to obey my commands. And then I noticed them, footprints. Hundreds of them, circling the room in strange, meticulous patterns. They hadn't entered with me. They were already there. Larger than human, pressed deep into the dust and sand that had crept in through cracks in the walls. My stomach dropped as I realized the patterns weren't random. They formed strange shapes, almost like symbols, twisting in spirals and jagged angles that seemed to move under my gaze. I backed toward the door, every nerve on edge, and the humming stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. It wasn't peaceful. It pressed against me, heavy and hungry, as if the building itself were watching, waiting for my next move. My hands shook as I gripped the doorframe, the shadows in the room seeming to curl and stretch toward me. The air grew colder, an icy draft cutting through the suffocating heat outside. I realized, with a jolt of terror, that the station wasn't abandoned. Something had been here, had been waiting, and it wasn't human. I wanted to run, to flee into the open desert, but when I turned, I saw movement. Just at the edge of my vision, a shadow slithered along the wall, impossible in its shape, twisting in ways a body shouldn't. My heart thundered, and for the first time, I understood the truth. The desert had eyes, and they were on me. I stumbled back into the desert, my legs trembling with every step, the sand swallowing my boots as if it wanted to keep me trapped. The sun was dipping lower now, streaking the dunes with long, angry shadows that twisted like fingers reaching for me. My chest heaved, my throat raw, and my mind scrambled for any sense of direction, any landmark to guide me. But the desert refused to be mapped. Rocks shifted in the distance, dunes that should have been familiar warped before my eyes, and the horizon seemed to retreat with every step I took. I realized then that the desert wasn't just a place. It was a predator, a living entity that reshaped itself to trap me. And then I saw it. At the edge of the crumbling gas station lot, a figure appeared, tall and impossibly thin, standing perfectly still. My stomach dropped. I wanted to run, to sprint blindly across the sand, but my legs felt like lead. I blinked and the figure had moved closer, gliding across the dunes without leaving footprints, its shape shifting unnaturally with the setting sun. My heart pounded in my ears, each beat echoing like a drum in the vast emptiness. I couldn't tell if it was human or some twisted illusion, but the presence radiated a cold intelligence, a patient malice that set every nerve on fire. I forced myself forward, stumbling over loose sand, my mind a blur of fear and disbelief. Each time I dared to glance back, the figure was nearer, and the shadows around it stretched and writhed as though alive. My instincts screamed that I should stop, that I should sink to the ground and hide, but the desert offered no shelter, no respite. Even the rocks seemed to twist, forming walls and barriers that disappeared when I looked directly at them. Panic clawed at my chest, suffocating and relentless. But I couldn't stop moving. Night fell abruptly, unnatural and sudden, swallowing the dunes in inky darkness. The stars appeared, glaring and cold, indifferent to my plight. I found a shallow wash between two dunes and collapsed, huddling against the rocks, hoping the shadows would hide me. I tried to steady my breathing, but every inhale sounded like a scream in the stillness. That's when I realized the figure had not moved far behind me. It didn't need to. The air around me pulsed with its presence, and I could feel its gaze pressing into me like a physical weight. I wanted to scream, but no sound escaped. My arms shook uncontrollably, and my mind reeled with the impossible. Then I noticed something that froze me in place. Footprints. Dozens of them converging around me in a perfect circle. They hadn't been there a moment ago. They stopped inches from where I crouched, forming a boundary I dared not cross. My chest heaved, my pulse a frantic drumbeat, and the desert went silent once more. But the silence was wrong. It was patient, waiting, a predator holding its breath before the kill. I stayed there, frozen and terrified, until the first cold light of dawn crept over the horizon. The footprints were gone and the figure had vanished. But the desert had changed. It felt alive, watching, and I knew in my bones that it had only begun to play with me. I moved again at first light, each step driven by a mixture of desperation and blind terror. The desert around me seemed to pulse, alive in a way that made my skin crawl. Dunes rose higher than they should, jagged rocks shifted subtly as I passed, and every time I thought I recognized a landmark, it would vanish or twist into something unfamiliar. My water was gone, my lips cracked and bleeding, and the sun burned relentlessly, but I could not stop. Stopping meant surrendering to whatever waited in this endless wasteland, and I was not ready to give in. Hours, or was it days, passed. Time had no meaning here. The sky remained harsh and glaring, or perhaps the sun refused to set, trapping me in an eternal, suffocating heat. My vision blurred, my limbs felt like lead, and every step became a monumental effort. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being guided, herded by the desert itself, toward something I did not want to find. Every dune I climbed, every dry wash I descended, seemed to push me further along a path I did not choose. Eventually, I stumbled upon a shallow cave nestled between two massive dunes. Its mouth yawned wide and dark, and the promise of shade pulled me forward. I crawled inside, collapsing onto the cool sand, my body trembling uncontrollably. Relief should have washed over me, but it did not. Instead, a gnawing unease gripped my chest. Something about this cave felt wrong. The air was heavier here, as though it were saturated with something ancient and hungry. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I noticed the walls. They were not bare. Symbols had been carved deep into the stone, spirals and jagged lines forming shapes that made my stomach twist. They were unfamiliar, yet familiar in a way that stirred a primal fear deep inside me. My pulse quickened as I looked down at the floor, and my breath caught in my throat. The sand had been disturbed, forming a shallow pit filled with small bleached bones. I hadn't heard anyone enter, hadn't seen anyone move, and yet the pit had grown as I watched. My mind screamed at me to leave, but my legs refused to obey. Then came the cold. A frost unlike anything in the desert wrapped around my arms and legs, spreading across my body despite the burning heat outside. And I felt it, a presence, immense and patient, pressing against me from every shadow in the cave. I could feel it watching, a consciousness not bound by flesh, not limited by walls or doors. My skin crawled, my teeth chattered, and my mind filled with a single horrifying thought. I was never alone. I tried to retreat, to inch back toward the mouth of the cave, but it was as if the shadows themselves had grown hands, gripping at my arms and legs, pulling me back. And then, faintly at first, I heard it, a whisper slithering into my mind. Not sound, not words spoken aloud, but a thought forced into my consciousness. You belong here. My stomach lurched, my vision blurred, and I stumbled backward, tripping over the bones and sand, and the cave seemed to stretch farther than it should, the darkness receding endlessly into its depths. Something waited beyond, patient, smiling, and I knew there was no escape. I kept moving, driven by sheer panic and the desperate hope of finding anything resembling safety. The desert around me had changed. Dunes loomed impossibly high, jagged ridges twisted like spires, and the horizon bent in ways no natural landscape should. My legs were raw and trembling, my lips cracked and bleeding, but I couldn't stop. Each step felt as though the sand itself were alive, pressing against my feet, trying to drag me back, hold me in place. I forced myself forward, driven only by fear, the memory of the cave and its whispering shadows etched into my mind. Time had lost meaning. The sun refused to set, or perhaps it had set long ago, replaced by a blinding, unrelenting glare that made my eyes water and my thoughts swirl. I stumbled across endless dunes, over loose sand and brittle rocks, until I collapsed into a hollow between two massive hills. I curled against myself, shivering despite the heat, praying for a moment of rest. But even in that brief pause, I felt it, the presence I had tried to escape. Patient, immense, pressing into the edges of my mind. Then I saw it. At first, I thought it was a mirage, a trick of the sun on the shifting sand. A massive shape glided over the dunes, impossibly tall, its form twisting and bending in ways no living thing could. It had no face, no features I could recognize, only a void where its head should have been. It moved with a fluid grace that was both mesmerizing and terrifying. My chest tightened, my limbs froze, and I realized I could not look away. And then I noticed the footprints. At first, I thought my mind was playing tricks. They were large, deep impressions pressed into the sand, leading directly toward me, but they weren't human. They had a strange rhythm, as if whoever or whatever made them walked in patterns that defied logic. And the worst part, I had not made them. Yet as I stared, heart hammering, I saw something truly impossible. They continued behind me, stretching back into the desert, trailing further than my eyes could follow. A wave of dread crashed over me. Somewhere in that endless, shifting expanse, something had been waiting. Something had been shaping the desert itself, manipulating the dunes, the shadows, the silence. And then the truth hit me with unbearable clarity. I was not being hunted. I had already become a part of it. My footsteps, my exhaustion, my fear, they had all been expected. The desert had prepared me, led me here, and now it was claiming me. The massive figure glided closer, its presence pressing on my mind like cold iron. I tried to scream, to run, but my voice and legs refused. And in that moment, I understood the final, horrifying reality. I had never been alone. I had never escaped. The desert had a memory, and it remembered me. As the shadow reached me, the wind rose, carrying a low, mocking laughter across the dunes. My vision blurred, my senses twisted, and I realized I would never leave. Not really. Somewhere beyond the horizon, beyond the endless dunes and twisted rocks, the footprints continued. And in their silent rhythm, I knew the desert was waiting for the next traveler.